Okie dokie, to start with you're going to need a half length piece of 18 gauge wire, hot glue gun that into a 2 centimetre polystyrene ball. To cut the petals out I used the Tinkertech Ruscus leaf cutter set. For the veining I used the Sugar Art Studio Slipper Orchid veiner, or you could buy a Dahlia veiner. Put everything to the side and grab a really well kneaded piece of flour paste. Like with our other flowers, you're going to roll out this flour paste so you could pick up the flour paste, put it in a book and be able to see the text of the book through the flour paste. When you have it rolled out, you're going to need to cut a ton of petals. So start using the smallest of the Ruscus leaf cutters and probably cut at least 50. As you are cutting the petals, put them into either a Ziploc bag or a petal board to stop them from drying out. Grab your petals and grab your veiner. Dust your veiner with corn flour, and you're going to literally just stack your petals onto the veiner, more than one at a time, because one, you don't really see the veining so much at the moment, and two, who wants to spend all day veining these tiny little petals? If you don't think you're going to be able to vein these really quickly, don't take them all out of the bag at the same time. Put the top veiner on, press down firmly, tip them out and start again. Now keep going until they're all veined. Grab a soft petal pad, gather together a few of the petals that you've veined and spread across the petal pad. Now we want to make these petals lightly curl, so grab a paintbrush, run along each petal, and that's going to make each petal lightly cup. If you find it does stick to your petals, then just dip the end of your paintbrush into some corn flour. Okay, grab your polystyrene ball and lightly paint the polystyrene ball with water. Make sure the ball is completely covered in water. If it's not covered, it won't stick. Now we need to start adding the petals. The tip of each petal should slightly overlap on the top half centre of the cone. Keep adding petals until the top half of the cone is completely covered. You don't want to be able to see any of the polystyrene ball. If they stop sticking down or start lifting, just add a tiny bit more water or sugar glue. Now we're going to add the next row of petals. Again, make sure your paintbrush is dipped in corn flour so it doesn't stick, and cup a few more petals. This time you're only going to glue halfway down the petal, so the top half of the petal will have no water or glue on it. Now add the petals at the same height that we added the last layer, but this row of petals, the tip of the petal is actually going to be lifted and raised. Going to alternate this row of petals, so on the first row where two petals met up, you're going to overlap them with a petal. Now we're going to add the third row, so cup your petals again. You're only going to glue again halfway up the petal, but this row of petals is going to go down a few millimetres lower than what the last row were. For all the rows of petals that you're going to do, you need to do what you did for the last row. Place these petals alternated between the petals in the previous layer. Remembering to keep these petals lower than the last row, keep filling in the gaps and work your way right around. Because we want to be able to keep our flower and the petals pliable, in between each row of petals, thoroughly wrap it in cling wrap and put to the side. With the next size up leaf cutter, cut another 20 or 30 petals. Grab a sharp knife and cut the end off each petal. Don't be too fussy, they don't all need to be the same length. When you finish cutting the ends off all these petals, make sure you vein them all. Now you're going to make these petals into a cone shape. Every single petal that you add to this flower from now on is going to be in this cone shape. Believe me, trust me, it gets a lot faster the more you've done. Here's a close-up of what the cone-shaped petals are going to look like. So you're going to wet one side of the petal and fold it over, and wet the other side and fold it over on top of the first side. Seriously though, as the petals get bigger, they get easier and faster to roll. Remove the wrap from around your bowl and lightly dampen the bottom half of the cone. Grab your petal pad and from the very middle part of the cone to the very tip of your petal, use your paintbrush to cut the petal. Glue the petals on. Again, you're going to alternate in between the other petals, and again, you're only going to make sure the bottom half of the petal is stuck down. Work your way around until the cone is completely covered again. Keep adding the petals until you have a few rows. Add each petal so they're roughly the same height as the row before, but make each petal now, each row now, start to loosen up so they look like they're falling open a bit more. You can see as we're adding these petals to the center of the flower that we're trying to make the flower look open, the petals look loose. You want to make the flower look like it's starting to open out. Don't forget to wrap your flower back up when you have finished these few rows. Now you're going to grab the next sized up leaf cutter and cut a heap more leaves. So if you look closely at these 3 petals, you can see how the fold over is either higher up on the petal or lower down. So whatever size petal you're making, fold them either higher up or lower down, mix them up and make every petal look different. Then grab your foam pad, your paintbrush and cut the petals the same way as we did last time. Grab your flower and unwrap the cling wrap. On the bottom part of the flower, about a third of the way up, add a small amount of water. Start adding these petals on a fraction higher than the last row. Make some higher, some a bit lower. Just keep them looking random and don't be too careful where you place them. Work your way around the flower, miss some spots, don't place them side by side. In the next row, fill in those spots. Put some petals higher than others. Keep your petal placement looking natural, not pinwheel perfectly positioned. Don't forget to wrap your flower again when you finish placing these petals. Keep cupping the petals and keep adding them until they're all on. Next, you're going to need to cut probably 15 of the third sized up cutter and probably 20-25 of the larger before cutters. Grab your veiner and start veining all the petals. Yep, I still cheated and used more than one petal at a time when I veined. Once I got to the largest of the 4 cutters, I had to do one at a time. Okay, so once you've cut all the petals out, have rolled them all into tubes, and make sure you've rolled them all differently at different heights, cupped them all, then we're going to start placing them. Take your flower out of the cling wrap and readjust your petals back to where they need to be. Add a small amount of water to the underneath side of the flower, and we're going to start adding the petals. Now the next couple of rows we're going to be predominantly using the larger of the cut petals. So using the larger of the petals, go through as we have done our last few rows and randomly add the petals. Leave a couple of gaps and then go back in with the smaller of the 2 petals and fill those gaps back in. Continue in the same way with the other petals at the other rows until all the petals have used up. Probably fine now with the larger petals but getting heavier, and if you stand your flower up into a normal standing position, the petals will start falling down, start drooping, so just be very careful from now on. After adding the first of my largest petals, I found that it was probably a little bit too long, stood up a bit too high from the other petals, so I just used a Stanley blade and cut a fraction off the end of it. Remember, if you do want to turn it over and have a look to see where your petals need to be placed, which gaps need filling in, support the petals with your hand. Just keep trimming and adding your petals until they're all done. Just remember to leave the gaps and add a few of the smaller petals in between. Once you've added this row of petals, very carefully this time wrap it up. Make sure you don't bend your petals backwards when you wrap it. This time using only the largest of the 4 cutters. Cut probably 15 or 20 petals out, vein them all, and then chew the bottom end of the petals over. We're going to cup half our petals the way we have been, but the other half we're going to flip over and we're going to bend back the opposite way. So this is to give our flower the effect of fully opening out. Also remember, if you find that you're taking a bit long to do these petals, just work on a couple at a time, and the spare petals put into a Ziploc bag or an airtight container so they don't dry out. Unwrap your flower from the cling wrap and reposition your petals. Be careful now though that you might find that your petals are starting to get a little bit hard. Add a bit of water, and again just randomly place your petals, so you're going to add some that are cupped normally and then add a few that are cupped backwards. You don't want to add all the cupped backwards one in one spot and then all the upright ones in another spot. Make sure they're mixed up. Keep going until you have used all the petals. Remember to cup half facing upwards and half so they're bending down. So from now on, we're not going to actually wrap your flower in cling wrap. You're going to bend the wire into a hook and hang it somewhere where it hangs freely without bending the petals up. Okay, finally we're on the home stretch. Now we're going to add our last 2 rows of wide petals. So you're going to grab some 28 gauge florist wire and you're going to cut that florist wire into thirds. You're also going to need to use your cell board, so flip the cell board over to the grooved section. To make these last 2 rows of wide petals, you're going to use a small amount of flower paste, place it over one of the cells in the cell board and roll with a rolling pin until it's paper thin. Flip it over onto a lightly dusted cell board and using your largest cutter, make sure the channel is running vertically along the cutter and cut it out. Take a length of the wire that we've cut, dip it into your water, wipe the excess water off into the back of your hand and using your middle finger and your thumb as a guide, carefully push the wire through into the channel. You want to push that wire in roughly a third of the way into the channel. Make sure your veiner is well dusted. Place your petal on the veiner and press down firmly. Take a paintbrush with a really small amount of water on it and very lightly paint the bottom part of the petal. Fold one side over just past the middle point and then fold the other side over so it's on top of the first side. Lay it down over a board or on the edge of a bench so the top end of the petal folds back. You're going to keep making these until you have about 11 or 12, and remember with each end of the petal, curve some back more than the others. To tape these on, we're going to use some half-width florist tape, so either use a tape shredder or cut your florist tape in half using a pair of scissors. From the very bottom of your petal down, bend your wire into an L shape, and either adding one at a time or a couple at a time, add those petals to the flower. Now you might find that you can only add one petal at a time, that's fine. Grab your half-width florist tape and tape these petals firmly into place. Again, it's not a problem to add one petal at a time. Exactly the same as the last row, you're going to want some petals rolled up and some rolled right back. Carefully keep manipulating the first row of wide petals until you have them placed where you want them. Take the remainder of the wide petals in between the gaps of your first row of wide petals. Again, you can do this one at a time or do several at a time, whatever you find works easier for you. If you think you haven't got enough petals, that your flower's not full enough, or you just have too many large gaps, just roll a few more petals and keep adding them until your flower's at the fullness that you're happy with. Grab another length of half-width florist tape. This time we're going to give our flower one last really good tape. So starting at the very underneath of the flower, work your way all the way down the wire. Do your final adjustment on your outer petals and then place into a piece of polystyrene upright to dry. To dust this flower, I used a small amount of Squire's Leaf Green, Squire's Vine, and Crafty Colours Azalea. I started by using a very small paintbrush and a combination of both greens, and where we actually had rolled each petal, the inside of that roll I filled with the green. So with the very small petals, go through each petal inside the cup and dust with the green. With the centre of a flower, just flick a bit of green over the edges of a few of the petals. When you get to the medium size and the larger of the petals, you don't want a concentrated green on the center of a petal. So start on the very, very middle of a petal and then gently flick your way out towards the center. And you only want the green to go probably maximum a third of the way up the petal. So you should basically get the effect of the very inside of the petal is like a concentrated green, and when it gets to the third of the way out of the edge of the petal, it's a very, very light shade of green. Once you're finished with the green, you're going to use the azalea pink. Now you're going to use a lightly dusted brush, and from the outer edge of the petal, you're going to flick it in towards the green. So on the outer edge, flick it in towards the green until you meet up. So again, you'll go from a concentrated pink to a lighter pink and meet to the green. Keep working your way around all the petals and add the azalea pink. When you finish the top part, flip it over and add the azalea pink to the underneath side of the petals as well. Might find some of your petals you'll need to work a bit of the green dust back into it. So just keep adding the green and the pink until you're completely happy with the shade that you have of both colours. And that's it, you've made and dusted your first azalea. Believe me, after your first one, your second, third and fourth, they just get easier and faster.